Hello everyone and welcome to Pocket Heroes, the show where I review overlooked comic book video games on handheld consoles. And today, snicked, pop out your claws because we're talking X2, Wolverine's Revenge on the Game Boy Advance. Released on April 14th, 2003, this is the unofficial movie tie-in game that shares half the title of the movie, X2 X-Men United. What's even going on here? We got Hugh Jackman on the box art, but the game model is not. He's voiced by Luke Skywalker. Let's not get into it. That's a whole other video. We're here to talk about the Game Boy Advance version, which I may have enjoyed more than the console version. I feel like a lot of people remember that game a lot better than it actually is. I streamed it a while back and was disappointed with how mediocre it was. The controls can be super clunky at times, the stealth system is half-baked, and worst of all, it has some egregious difficulty spikes. One advantage that the Game Boy Advance versions of these types of games has is that they usually stick to a single theme. What I mean is that a lot of these licensed games try to juggle multiple elements, platforming, stealth, puzzles, and they don't do any of those exceptionally well. With Wolverine's Revenge on the Game Boy Advance, you get a game that's just trying to be a simple 2D beat-em-up/platformer. Before getting into the gameplay though, I like to start with talking about the graphics. I've said before that I'm not a fan of when GBA games try to give their characters a 3D look. It's just not as aesthetically pleasing as clean 2D sprites. Sometimes it can work alright when characters have distinct features. Looking at Wolverine's model, his posture, outfit, and hairstyle make him recognizable. But then you get these generic looking bad guys and I'm stuck trying to figure out, are you a robot or is that some sort of disco outfit? And don't even get me started on this creepy thing. Jumping onto gameplay, or should I say lunging. You know, cause Wolverine does that, you know that thing. Wolverine's Revenge is a beat-em-up/platformer/stealth game. That last one sounds weird, I know, but we'll get to that. Let's talk about what Wolverine does best, which isn't very nice. The combat in this game is pretty good. There's good feedback when your attack lands, and while there aren't any unlockable attack moves, the basic 3-hit combo is satisfying enough to hold the game down for its short runtime. Enemies have life bars, which is a small detail, but there's something about enemy life bars that I just appreciate so much. You can manually pop out your claws in and out, which if you're a Wolverine game and you do this, you're immediately a good Wolverine game. So X2 Wolverine's Revenge on PS2, I take back what I said at the beginning of this video. You're a top tier Wolverine game. Given there's not much competition, well, we'll get there. Having your claws retracted actually serves a purpose. When they're inside you, I could have worded that better. Your healing factor kicks in, which, I mean, it's not really how this power works, but it works in terms of balancing gameplay. You'll also notice this meter below Wolverine's health, and that is his rage meter. When completely filled, Logan goes into a hysteric fit, giving his slashes more damage and range? How does that work? I guess the wind his slashes produce become more intense as well? It's kind of a staple to have Wolvie's classic Berserker Rage implemented whenever he's a playable character. Couple of weird things with how it works here though. One, you can build up your rage meter by just slashing the air. In my opinion, it would have made much more sense if you had to make contact with an enemy, because I found myself cheesing it and exploiting this feature. 2. Later on, you get the ability to wall climb with your claws, but you're unable to do so when you're in this rage mode. It can get kind of annoying waiting for your rage to cool down just so you can progress through the level. And not to mention that Wolvie has to stand there for a couple seconds like he has the world's worst hangover before you can move on. And lastly, the rage mode kinda ruins some of the boss fights. What I mean is that all these boss fights are designed to test your reflexes and dexterity. You know, you gotta memorize the boss's patterns. They can be pretty challenging at times. But then I get my rage meter filled up and just pulverize each boss with no remorse. Actually, a little bit of remorse, because look at just how I embarrass Magneto, who's the last boss of the game. I felt bad for the poor geezer. Moving on to what's probably the sloppiest implemented aspect of the game, and that's its stealth system. Having stealth in a 2D game can be a pretty tricky task. There have been games that have absolutely nailed it, see Mark of the Ninja, but then you get instances like Wolverine's Revenge. Whenever the game introduces a stealth level, it doesn't bother to compensate by zooming out the camera, which is odd because there are other times where the game totally does just that. By the time the enemy is visible on your screen, they're gonna spot you, triggering an alert phase. But honestly, don't even sweat it, because the punishment for being spotted is inconsequential. During the alert phase, a couple of extra enemies will spawn until this meter here runs out. But these extra forces are total pushovers. It would have made sense if these extra enemies did a lot more damage than the usual ones, or even having an instant fail state upon discovery. But again, there has to be some sort of compensation, with either a zoomed out camera or a radar. Maybe using Wolverine's heightened senses could have been a clever way of implementing a radar. Speaking of, Wolverine's heightened senses are here. There are certain sections of the game where you pick up an item such as a piece of clothing that will make fart clouds appear, and a compass that points you in the right direction. This works pretty well too. Easily my least favorite part of the game are these infuriating chase sections. You're tasked with chasing down Sabretooth without getting too close or he'll notice, thus failing the level. These levels are way too fast paced and leave little room for error. If you time a jump poorly by even a second, Sabretooth will ghost out of there faster than Cyclops and X-Men The Last Stand. Platforming in these games is probably my favorite aspect. The controls are tight and Wolverine has a satisfying wall jump and slide, reminiscent of Mega Man X. As you progress through the game, you'll pick up new abilities that will change the way Wolverine traverses through the levels. Wall climbing with your claws like I mentioned before, double jumping, sliding, and eventually clinging to the ceiling. You can even visit old levels with your newfound abilities to get to previous inaccessible platforms to pick up danger room simulations. This made me realize how this game could have been something really special if it had decided to be a Metroidvania game instead. Obviously nowadays Metroidvania games are a dime a dozen, especially with indie games. But back in 2003, having a Metroidvania Wolverine game set in a Weapon X facility could have been badass. On the Game Boy Advance especially. Admittedly, having simple abilities like a slide and a double jump be the unlockable moves that help you progress through the map are not very impressive. Like, why would Wolverine need to discover the ability to slide? It's not that hard of a thing to do. The story is totally different from the console version, having different bosses like Pyro and Omega Red. Eventually you find out that Magneto is trying to use Jean Grey as a subject for the Weapon X program, but this time it's Weapon XX. You're 1 X away from turning this innocent E rating to a nasty AO there, Eric. Take it easy. And like I said before, I straight up humiliated Magneto in the final boss fight. But if you play the game on superhero difficulty, which is unlocked after you beat the game once, you get an extra boss fight at the end against Phoenix. So that's neato. In the end, Wolverine returns Jean Grey safely back to the X-Mansion and rides off in his motorcycle into the sunset and on to his next adventure. So that's X2 Wolverine's Revenge on the Game Boy Advance. A game that I surprisingly enjoyed more on the Game Boy Advance rather than the console version. I feel like the console version has too many clunky mechanics and doesn't do any of them well. The GBA version is a little more focused. But yeah, I tried something a little different with the video format this time around. Let me know if there's too much stuff going on the screen. You know, I'm always experimenting with the show, trying new things, seeing what sticks. But yeah, as always guys, if you want to see me play these games live, follow me at my Twitch, twitch.tv/beholdasack. The link is always down in the description. Hang out with me. It's always a good time just kind of having a live reaction to these hidden gems. You know, sometimes they're surprisingly well, sometimes they're like these abominations that no one ever talks about, and it's fun just kind of discovering these games together. So please join me. It's a lot of fun, I promise you. But as always, subscribe for more superhero related content, video game stuff, and I'll see you guys next time.